The next one on this list are one of two games that were official debuts for the new gaming company back in 1995 from Salt Lake City called SingleTrack. The first one we're going to talk about is a game that was supposed to be Sony's major killer app for the system, and that's game number 22, Warhawk. Although had a decent success, but was overshadowed and became Sony's least popular IPs. Published by Sony Computer Entertainment and developed by Sony Interactive Studios and SingleTrack. The story takes place in the distant future, where an evil megalomaniac named Creel wants to take over the world by using a chemical source called red mercury, which provides his forces with their nigh invulnerability, making them unstoppable, and a global threat. So for the world's last hope to take down Creel and his army, you control a vehicle called Warhawk, led by not one but two pilots, named Hatch and Walker, whose orders by the female commander of the international force, giving you mission objectives across 6 zones you need to traverse. It's up to you to take down Creel and his army and taking the red mercury away from them before Creel's world domination comes to fruition. There's little to know of its development history about the game, so let's talk about the company SingleTrack. Their company debut began in 1995, led by 3 programmers, Mike Bartholomew, Todd Kelly, and Michael Ryder, which the 3 were originally former programmers for the company Evans and Sutherland, a pioneering American computer firm where they programmed 3D graphics used for training and simulation used primarily for the military back in the day, until the 3 wanted to move away from military simulation and make 3D graphics and software engineering skills into the video game industry. So the 3 gathered a group of developers and formed their own gaming company from Salt Lake City in Utah, SingleTrack Entertainment Technologies Inc., or just SingleTrack to be short. Meanwhile, Sony was trying to find some Western game companies for the upcoming system, until they found one from Salt Lake City, so Sony sent their 2 game designers, Mike Guillaume and David Jaffe, over to Utah and see the work they did back when they were still working with Evans and Sutherland before brokening up to become SingleTrack. Both of them were immediately impressed of the work the group have created, especially when Guillaume and Jaffe were on the F-16 virtual cockpit and see the 3D coming to life. It felt like they were in a virtual world and possibly the most fun time both of them ever had. After their trip from Utah, they went back to Los Angeles and told Sony that they were the right team for the job. So Sony managed to make a contract deal with SingleTrack, and thus SingleTrack, along with Guillaume and Jaffe, began working on their first 2 games. But in order to release both of them in the same day in November, Sony had to split them into groups in order to finishing these games in time until the November deadline. While Jaffe and his team were working on his own passion game, which we'll get to in the next history/review after this one, Guillaume and his team were working on a game that would be a killer app for the system in North America and soon enough international, and had high hopes of becoming one of the greats, and that was Warhawk. Mike Guillaume, along with his team, came up with the idea and explained how the game's basic concept was formed and said, "We looked at shooters like Afterburner and Star Fox, and we juxtaposed their arcade feeling with the freedom of a computer flight sim." And last but not least, both games being this one and the other one, was led by the producer Scott Campbell, which he had a huge part in SingleTrack in its early years, and would create his own company along with David Jaffe called Incognito Entertainment 4 years later. But we're getting off track here, so back to topic. When it was released in North America in November 10th, 1995, Europe in December 1st, 1995, and Japan in October 4th, 1996, it was a decent hit and received overwhelming positive reviews. Critics lauded the precise controls, music, graphics, sound effects, and most especially the freedom and variety afforded by the open 3D world and complex flight controls, though some felt the game was too short. The only reviewer that I could find, at least to my knowledge, is from the official UK PlayStation magazine, issue 2, January 1996, and said, "A genuinely rewarding, thrilling action experience, very tough, but well worth the investment in time, patient and lost sleep. Go get it." However, even with having some generally good reviews and ratings, it was still overshadowed. By who, you may ask? Well, we'll get to that sooner or later. For now, let's get on to the review. The graphics are mostly good in a few areas. Some, like your or the enemy ships, are very good design, and the textures, either objects or walls, are alright and passable for 95 standards. The only con to it is that the visual looks dated in some aspects. But like I said, it is passable since it is one of the 2 debuted games from Single Track, and they were still very new at the time. But at least they did a decent job in the graphics department and could simply ignore it once you have a fun time playing it. The presentation is pretty alright. When you're in first person view, you could see the inside of your ship, and if you press the shoulder buttons, you can move your character and see parts of your ship, which is a fine and a neat detail. Next is the game HUD, starting with the bar on the upper left. Instead of a life bar like most games, you have 4 bars in each and every part of the ship that can damage one part, either left, right, rear, or front. If one of them gets damaged and completely drained, no matter what part of your ship, you will die and have to start from your previous checkpoint. Also in first person view, if you take in damage in the front, you'll see a crack in a glass, which is also a fine detail. But however, there's just this one detail that doesn't feel like it shouldn't be in a KA rated game. Why? Well, let me give you a quick example. This is what happens if you die and lose all of your lives in third person. The screen turns red, indicating that you got a game over. Clean and simple. But now here's what happens if you die in first person. Yeah, 5 words. Holy shit, there's blood everywhere. I can't believe that the ESRB forgot about this part and just give it a KA for kids to adults. Then again, they also forgot about the final boss from Earthbound, which is the most disturbing and terrifying out of the game, and yet gave it a kids to adults rating. But we're getting sidetracked, so back to the game. The bottom left is the weapons and the total amount you have. You can't switch them by pressing the shoulder buttons. The bottom right is just an indication of how many red mercury tanks there are in the level, and turns red if you got one. And the upper right is the map and where you are, and that's about it. Next is the loading screen. In short, I really like the loading transition and looks freaking sweet, either loading a level or losing a life. Nuff said. And finally, we have the live action cutscenes. At glance, it's not that bad, and looks decent, with a mix of using real prop structures and a little bit of a green screen too. And they each show one after you finished a level and telling you what the objectives are. So with that, the sets for filming is fine, but however, what is not fine is the acting, and oh god, it is completely bland. Like seriously, this is one of the most boring dialogues I ever heard, and the characters are so generic and one-dimensional that I just want to skip the cutscenes and move on to the next level. Overall, great settings, but bad acting. Oh, and one last thing, there are multiple endings, which instead of ending it off on another live-action cutscenes, it just shows text only, which is a bit anticlimactic and a bit disappointed. And also there are game over texts, with each one having a different text if you die in a level that you're on, and that's pretty much it. The music is fantastic. I don't know why, but Single Track manages to make some brilliant music for their games, and they definitely hit their stride with the first game. It has a sense of danger, orchestra, and cinematic for this soundtrack. Nothing else to say but brilliant and a well done job. To the composers Chucky Myers, Tom Hopkins, and Lance Lanhart, as well as other single-track games which they composed. And finally, the gameplay. The controls are hard to get used to at first, but eventually figure out the controls after a few minutes in, then you'll get the hang of it. The layout of the game is simple. You must destroy the enemy target, mostly the main baddies, and grab the red mercury tank from them. After collecting an amount of them in the level, you must move on to the next level after a brief cutscenes. However, the only problem is not the level structures, they're perfectly fine, it's actually the total playtime. In total, there are only 6 levels in the entire game, making it a bit short. I wish they could have added in more, but I guess they couldn't really do that since this and the other one were sort of rushed, since the development started back somewhere in late 94 or early 95, unlike most games that usually be completed either 2 or 3 years, or mostly take a bit longer. Thankfully, it didn't hurt the game, and the controls are well decent. But still a shame that they could have made 1 or 2 more levels, since 4 levels are open areas and 2 levels are linear areas, and could have at least made 2 more linear levels, so it could be even. But hey, what can you do? Now on to the conclusion. The game may be short due to being rushed, but luckily didn't hurt the game when it was released, and is actually a good and mostly a fun game. And the soundtrack is perfect and fitted for this game. Though I wish they could have added more levels to make the game longer, and the acting in the cutscenes are so unbearable that I recommend skipping them. So, what happened after its release? Well, even though it had some great reviews and did get a greatest hits label, and were also plans for a Windows version, slated to be released in 1996, but was never released and officially cancelled. There were plans to make a sequel called Warhawk 2, which was in development back in 1996 by Singletrack, but was taken by the infamous 989 Studios, which had gotten the rights to Singletrack's IPs back when they were with Sony, which would be another story for another day, who would work on the sequel, but however, it never made it out of the drawing board, which the project was ultimately canned due to unknown reasons. Then after that, the series was dormant in the PS2 years, but the Warhawk craft did appear as a cameo appearance as a final boss from Twisted Metal Black. But eventually, the series did saw a comeback in the PS3 years. However, instead of a sequel, they instead made sort of a remake and online multiplayer only, simply called Warhawk, or Warhawk 2007, which was released both on PlayStation Network and physical retail. But unfortunately, on January 31st, 2019, the server was shut down by Sony themselves, and the game was no longer playable. But just like every single online-only games, fans of the game tried to make it online again by installing a new app called Warhawk Reborn. But it will take a little longer, so I'll send a couple of links that shows you how it's done. And finally, there was one other game that also started out as a sequel to Warhawk back in 2009, which the game would be in its unofficial name, Warhawk in Space. But in 2010, the Warhawk title was removed, and it eventually became a spiritual successor rather than a true sequel called Starhawk, released in 2012. As of 2020, there hasn't been a real true follow-up to Warhawk, and sadly became one of Sony's least popular IPs. But why to be exact? Was it because it wasn't a major killer app Guillaume, his crew, and Sony thought they hoped? Or was it the game being too short and a bit lacking due to rush time? Or maybe, just maybe, that the game was overshadowed by Singletrack's second game, which was released the same day from Warhawk, which not only it was beaten out by Singletrack's second title, but was a commercial success, had a lot of positive reviews and reception, a new genre that has never been done before, and became one of Sony's first major titles to be a hit outside from Japan. And what is that game I'm talking about? Well, I'm telling you that in the next history/review. Anyways, with all that said and done about Warhawk, I give my official rating a 4 out of 6. Next time on the PlayStation Years, we take a look at SingleTrack's second game, which you already know what the game is since I gave a hint in the conclusion. But if anyone who didn't get the hint and want to know what game I'm talking about, well, you just have to wait until the next review. Thanks for watching.